Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Talking Tense, a RaceSpot TV podcast. Thank you for joining us, either live across RaceSpot's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch, or through the audio version released the very same day on a podcast app of your preference. As always, my name is Arjuna Kankipati, and I'm joined by our producer Hugo Luis down in the production room controlling the action. And today I'm delighted to say I am joined by Jamie Fluke, driver for Apex Racing Team UK, and Jamie's going to be joining me throughout the show here today. And Jamie, delighted to have you on. It's been an interesting season for you this year in the Porsche Esports Super Cup, which we'll get to in just a little bit. But delighted to talk to you about your varied interest in sim racing, as you will, because you have a lot of history in a lot of different cars.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been around the block a little bit now, and I guess there's plenty to cover over the next however long that we're going to be doing this.
Well, we'll start by diving into the most recent round of the Porsche Tag Heuer Esports Super Cup from Le Mans, the rescheduled round, as many have been calling it, the Electric Boogaloo 2, as you called it in your stream title as well, Jamie. Yeah. But we'll start with the championship picture. And for Joshua Rogers, it was an important round, coming in almost 84 points behind Sebastian Job. He had a lot of work to try and just preserve that championship fight leading into the last round at Monza. And getting a second and a first in the heat and then the feature race, he does manage to keep the title fight alive. But Job, with a very strong fourth and second, is well and truly in the driver's seat. And just wanted to ask you, Jamie, we've talked here about how impressive a season it's been for Sebastian. It's been, other than one round at Barcelona where he got a little bit unlucky, he's managed to come out, in the top 4 or 5 basically in every single round. From a driver's perspective, what do you think has changed for him this year? Last year, he had a very strong season, like I said a few weeks ago as well, but definitely had just brought everything together and really showing us what a complete driver he is this season.
Yeah, I think you've pretty much nailed the point there. He's been able to take the undoubted talent that he's had and he's displayed over the last 5 or 6 years, and I think he's just finally hit that maturity point where he's able to put it all together, and he's not fighting to the death essentially for every single position that he's going for. He's smarter now in choosing his battles, I've noticed. He'll still give it absolutely everything when it suits, but he's smarter. He's not making. I haven't really noticed any mistakes that he's made this season either. So he's cut out the silly stuff essentially, and the results have showed.
And I think talking about him being a complete driver, definitely one of the things that when we talked to him, he mentioned all the mental preparation he did. And, one thing that we're going to talk about a little bit later is just how calm and collected you are as a driver. And it's something we see on your Twitch streams as well. How hard is that for you at that world championship level? Because I've competed at, top split events myself, and I always get very, very heated, and I have to get my teammates to calm me down. How important is it to actually be able to maintain your cool and to then be able to deliver the kind of performance that you're capable of?
For me, at the end of the day, every race is its own race. It doesn't really matter who you're racing up against, as weird as that probably sounds. The focus is always, regardless of the competition, it's getting the most out of what you can bring to the table. So if you rock up to your very first ever top split race, well, you're in there on your own merit for sure. Just drive how you always have driven. I can even remember The very first Pro Series race I did back in 2016, I think it was the end of 2016, and I got like the greatest sense of validation when I had difficulties in qualifying, but still got it quite far up the grid. I was like, okay, I can actually compete at this level, and that kind of settled me down, and I've kind of just sort of taken it from there. That each race, while it's still very, very important, it's still just another race at the end of the day, and thinking too much about, you know, the competition that you're dealing with or anything like that, sort of leaves you prone to making mistakes. So just ensuring that you focus on the basics and make sure that you do everything that you know that you can do will hold you in good stead.
And so one more round to go. Seb is in the driver's seat. We head to Monza. It's bound to be a crazy, chaotic race, but Le Mans was crazy and chaotic in its own ways as well. And we saw Seb taking a more measured approach, knowing that that title is on the line. So I think Monza is going to be a very interesting round. I do see your teammate Kevin Ellis Jr. now in our YouTube chat, and he's the second driver I wanted to talk about here, Jamie, because Kevin is now up into 4th place in the standings. He's leaped over Max Benecke, who had to miss the last round with a suspension. For Kevin, the results have slowly started to improve. The Nordschleife round, a 2nd, 4th, the race before that, 2 second places at Spa, definitely in a good spot right now. And what do you think has been the difference maker for Kevin, because he started off the season with a string of much more difficult results?
Sure, yeah. So I think a lot of what's worked well for us is that we were able to pair up with the guys at MSI Esports, and having just an extra couple of bodies around just to help push each other along in practice has been really, really useful, especially for Kev. Kev's put a lot of time into this season, a lot of effort in, and sometimes it just takes a few rounds for the efforts to really bear fruit. And thankfully he's executed pretty much every single round from Road Atlanta basically onwards, maybe the one after. So he's just knocking it out of the park at the minute, and I'm sure he'll pick up his first win at some point, either, well, hopefully maybe for Monza, if not next season as well.
So the last round from Monza is coming up in just a few weeks' time, the 10th of October. And one thing I'm curious about here, Jamie, it's something that you obviously are concerned, I'm sure, about as well, but the last race of the season, you want to make sure you're in the top 20 in the point standings, so you don't have to go through what is one of the more difficult qualifying series across the iRacing service. And now there's still a lot of strong drivers in and around that playoff bubble. One driver in particular that I think is very interesting was Brian Lockwood, who of course debuted with a bang in that first race of the season. It's not really been as smooth for him right now, and currently outside of that bubble. For some drivers who are in that midfield pack, how much excitement are you expecting from in the last race of the season? Yes, there is the expectation that they need to get some good points in order to try and make sure they're in that top 20, but at the same time, I'm expecting some of these guys are going to really be fighting with all their worth to try and stay in the series.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's ever going to be a race in the mid-pack that's just going to be complete chaos, this will be the one. It's a tough one, because I think for a lot of guys who are currently inside the cut line, all that they really probably need to do is put together 2 solid races in both the sprint and the feature, and they'll be fine. But at the same time, you can't be too defensive at a track like Monza, because you'll just get eaten alive almost. It's very difficult to just ride in line and hold position, because guys will, chomp at the bit basically to overtake you. So there's a lot of pressure probably every single lap of the races. Weekend coming, but the weekend after, and who knows what can happen. I'm excited to just get stuck in and have a bash myself, really.
Well, I'm sure you're excited, but one other of your teammates has jumped into our YouTube chat here, Johan Hart, and the reason I wanted to bring him up is he's one of a number of drivers, Mitchell de Jong, Bobby Zelensky, the other two that spring to mind, who are competing in both the Porsche Esports Super Cup and the iRacing Rallycross World Championship, for which the first round of that happened this past Saturday as well. So they're 3 drivers who, as we head to Sunday, have to sort of split their attention. And for Johan, he's really had a very impressive fight back, because he was way down in the standings a few rounds ago. Had 3 points, I think, at one point of the season, and now he's up into 15th place, just 9 points behind you as well. For drivers like that who are really splitting their attention and having to really be diverse in their preparation attempts as well, it can be very difficult. And one thing that I thought was interesting is Mitchell de Jong, who got a 1st and 3rd place in the Porsche Esports Super Cup, then took that form over into the iRacing Rallycross World Championship. And while he didn't win the feature race there, because of the point structure there with the heat and qualifying, he's actually leading that championship. So for three drivers there, how important do you think it is going to be for that first race at Monza to really go smoothly and effectively so they set themselves up nicely for that iRacing Rallycross World Championship as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you have a bad race of any description, it sort of puts you in a bit of a bad mood, or maybe clouds your clear thinking, maybe. So having a good race at Monza definitely can set you up very, very well for their second round in Rallycross. Johan, I can say, is one of the most diverse and versatile characters in all of sim racing. Like how quickly he's able to swap from car to car, and effectively as well, is incredible. Now, I've not worked with either Mitchell or Bobby, so I can't say so much about them, but obviously they're able to transition very, very well as well. But Johan's brilliant at being able to, even if he has a bad race or whatever, he can reset and just go again almost immediately. So I would expect him to still be very, very good, both at Monza and wherever the second round for Rallycross is. Sorry, I've forgotten where it is off the top of my head. I don't tweet the series. So
I've actually forgot it as well. It might be Sonoma, which would be an interesting one of two races this season where they'll visit the track twice over the course of 9 rounds. But like we say, 10th of October, you don't want to miss the season finale of the Porsche Tag Heuer Esports Super Cup. A champion will be crowned, and 20 drivers are going to have to fight back through the qualifying series. But Jamie, let's jump into your background in sim racing. We talked for a few minutes yesterday just to kind of get a sense of how we wanted this conversation to go. And the one thing that I really picked up was that it was kind of a quick transition for you. You jumped into sim racing in 2014 as a youngster, if you will. And then 3 years later, you had made the jump up into the World Championship Series, and straight away the results started coming. And the one thing that I wanted to ask you is, you don't really have much background in real racing like some of the other people we've talked to on the podcast before. However, it definitely seems like there was a family passion for motorsports, and sim racing was just an avenue for you to be able to explore that further.
Yeah, exactly. So from a young age, I've always watched motorsport of any and all descriptions, whether it's local touring cars or whether it's Formula One or Rallycross or whatever I could get my eyes on, I was watching it. Plus, my uncle used to race some short track ovals here as well, locally in the UK. So I've always sort of grown up around it. But money's tight for so many people to actually race, competitively, is difficult to do. So I spent a lot of my teenage years sort of trying to figure out actually what I wanted to invest my spare time in. Did a whole host of things, but eventually sort of came back round into racing games and into sim racing then back in 2014, and got hooked on iRacing basically almost immediately, and just took it from there. It was sort of the addiction of trying to go faster and beating everyone around me. Sort of like it lit a bit of a fire under me, and I've kind of just taken it and ran basically.
Well, and I think the great thing about sim racing is that you get that constant loop, right? It's constant competition, and like you say, you can always compare yourself against the best drivers, and that's something that is so invaluable in trying to learn. And as you grew in sim racing, you obviously started in 2014 in iRacing. You then jumped into the Apex Racing Academy in 2015. Can we talk a little bit about that experience before you actually joined the main Apex team? What was it like as you learned from some of those drivers as you would now then in the future go on to compete against?
Yeah, it was sort of like an interesting sort of period of time for me, at least within sim racing, where I'd competed in various just sort of regular official championships, Star Mazda back in the day and the Spec Racer Ford, but I wasn't really like focused in a very clear direction and where to go, and seeing the opportunity to join the Apex Racing Academy with the sort of almost the tagline behind it of being, the place to go if you want to like learn to become, a pro level driver. And I was like, okay, sweet, this is my ticket in almost. And I jumped in, and I ears and eyes wide open to try and absorb as much information as I could from all the guys in there. So there's a lot of guys even are still at World Championship level. So Graham Carroll was there, and Sebastian Joe was there, and team boss even still now, Alex Simpson. Like, I learned so much from those guys in the early days there. And yeah, invaluable part of my sim racing career was spent just picking their brains every single evening to try and understand the sim better, understand even driving quickly that little bit better, and just sort of taking it from there.
And we'll get onto this a little bit later. It's all come full circle with the Apex Racing Academy restarting this year, partnering with VRS as well. But just a question there. You talk about, Graham Carroll being one of the people in the academy at the time. Let's just talk a little bit briefly about this current Porsche Esports Super Cup season before we dive back into your introduction to the World Championship setting. Now, last year, you got 6th place in this championship, which was a really impressive result. And I know you wanted to build upon that coming into this year. However, it's been a little bit tougher as you would say, and in the most recent round as well, 3 wide with Tumas Tatila and Graham Carroll in the sprint race. 3rd place you were running at the time, or 2nd place, I guess, because 3 wide for 2nd. But unfortunately, that incident happened as you went down into one of the slowest parts of the track. It seems like that's kind of been the story of your season. You've had some good performances here and there, but just bad luck or just getting caught up in racing incidents that, sometimes you honestly can't do anything about.
Yeah, it has been a tough season. I think a lot of it's come down to not quite putting it all together in qualifying, which I was able to do last season. The reasons for that are probably very, very small and very minute, but the margin for error is so small at this level that the difference between getting yourself inside the top 8 and being P20 maybe in qualifying is a tenth, 2 tenths sometimes. And I was able to get on the right side of that more often than not last season, and this season it's been a little bit tougher. And then obviously with last weekend, the one opportunity where I did have, where I was battling up at the front, it didn't work out my way. I still don't really have any regrets or really that much anger over it, because I know that I didn't do anything wrong really in that scenario. It was just one of those things where I got pinched and then tipped round. So it hasn't quite worked out for me this season, but I'm still 14th in points and have a comfortable buffer over the cut line. So I should still be back for next season, and I can have hopefully a better shot at it.
Yeah, and maybe reset over the winter, just try and reevaluate a few things. That's one of the things that I learned from Sebastian Job. In fact, he talked about some of the reset that he went over the past winter. But we'll jump back then, just before you get into the iRacing World Championship scene. You talked about Spec Racer 4. You actually won the 2015 iRacing Spec Racer 4 Challenge Champion, the overall division, I guess, as well. So you've had success at this point in some of these iRacing just official series. You then jump into, in 2016, the iRacing Grand Prix Series champion, the Grand Prix Series, and you win that series to then get qualified up into those pro qualifiers. At this point, you're now part of the Apex Racing team. What's your schedule looking like? Because I wanted to try and understand what's different between how you started in World Championship competitions, whereas what your preparation is looking like. So roughly how much time are you spending on your practice at that point?
I would say that the time that I was putting in back then probably isn't quite as much as now, but it's certainly now I would like to be putting more time in. I'm still working a full-time job, so getting the practice in the evenings is crucial, and it makes it a little bit difficult to sometimes manage my time effectively to try and practice and test everything that I want to test. I wouldn't even say that my hours have gone up that much. Maybe the year that I came in, I was averaging 10 hours of practice for a World Championship event. Now it's closer to 15. If it's more than 15, I'm doing well. And the results actually tend to show that. The more time I put in, the better my results are, but it's just finding the time to put in. Hopefully for next season, with the schedule change within my own personal life, I'll be able to put a fair bit more in, and hopefully that will result in better, hopefully end up in giving me better results.
Well, you talk about, maybe not putting in as much time necessarily, but it sounds like the one thing I was trying to maybe look into a little bit more is the quality of practice that you put in. Because like you say, you're still one of these drivers who, you're still fairly young at the age of 26 years old, and that does make you one of the oldest members of the Apex team in many ways. But you're 26 years old, you have a full-time career as well, and you're trying to balance your passion for sim racing on the side do you feel like your practice is now a lot more effective in a lot of ways? Because the one thing I learned very early on is that you can practice for hours and hours and hours, but if it's not good practice, you're often just hurting yourself and wasting a lot of your time. So is that something you've really had to focus on as you continue to get a bit older?
Yeah, definitely. I've learned where my limits are when it comes to practice. So as soon as I find that I'm not finding time or not finding the information that I'm looking for, I'll stop. I'll take a break. I'll maybe analyze some data and come back to either later that evening or the next day or whatever that might be. I think it's important that whenever you do practice, that you feel good when you practice. It doesn't and should not be a chore or a grind or a negative thought process. It has to still be positive and enjoyable and fun at the end of the day. I think that's where you get your best results from. Obviously, you still got to put the hard work in. It's still you can't slack off at the same time, but it's maximizing your energy resources almost is probably the best way to sort of put it.
Well, you did qualify the first time around, which is a very impressive thing. A lot of people spend a few years trying to qualify into the iRacing World Championship Series once they get to that pro qualifier level. And then you jump into a car that has had a renaissance recently in a new update and a new tire model being brought to the McLaren MP430. But, back in the day, that was a car, I don't want to say hated by a lot of the community, but disliked. It required a lot of time to set up the car. It was sometimes difficult to drive on power down, had a lot of tweaking to do in the in-car settings as well, and it's not a car you particularly enjoyed. But in your first 2 years in the World Championship Series, which were in the McLaren, you got an 8th and 9th place results. You also got a 2nd place, I do believe, in one of those races. So can you explain a little bit about how, despite not maybe liking the car as much as you do the current Porsche Esports Super Cup car, the 911 Cup car, how you got those results and how you really stepped up once you were in World Championship competitions?
Sure. I think this sort of goes back to when I joined the Apex Racing Academy at the tail end of 2015, which was when the McLaren came out to the iRacing service. So basically from day one, I spent, whatever free time I had in that car and learning every last little nook and cranny with it to the best of my ability. So that when it came time to qualifying for pro and then on into the World Championship, I had enough knowledge sort of banked in my head at least to adapt to whatever changes were made from build to build or even just the increased level of competition. I was able to, I think, initially sort of maximize my skill level at the time, maybe a little bit better than others, and I was able to get better results than maybe my true raw pace as a driver at that time would indicate. And yeah, I think then I was able to actually transition that similarly to the Porsche Cup car when we moved to that for last year. Spent a lot of time in the off season once it got announced, just lap after lap, hour after hour, just focusing solely on that car, so that I was 100% ready come round one of last season's World Championship.
Well, it was a 2nd place result in Zandvoort in 2018 in the McLaren. I just went back to look at that. Can you talk a little bit about the emotions there? Because, that's one of the last series of that car. A lot of people had, built up so much knowledge, and despite the fact that you had done so much preparation as well, it was a very, very competitive series, and it must have been a very gratifying feeling after 4 years of building up to this point to get onto the podium, to get 2nd place, and to really show everybody exactly what a driver you are.
There was a little bit of that, but I still firmly believe I should have won that race. So from what I remember of it, it was Martin up front and I was running 2nd, and I think the general strategy was a 2-stop that race, and then Mitchell decided to go on a 1-stop, and Zandvoort's a very difficult place to overtake even in a smaller car, let alone something as quick as the Formula 1 car, and I spent about 10 laps too long trying to get by him, and I just ran out of time trying to catch Martin at the end. I think we had the quickest car that day as well, so it was just a little bit frustrating. It was good as well, still, to get the good result and 2nd place, which was by far my best result to date. But I still wanted to win that race really, really bad and didn't quite get there.
A classic racing driver. You always want what you can't have, I guess. And if you're going to lose to anyone, it might as well be to Kroenke, one of the greatest in the downforce generation of World Championship Series. But let's move on then to the current era of World Championship competitions, the Porsche Tag Heuer Esports Super Cup. And you told me a story yesterday I found very interesting. This would have been towards the tail end of 2018. You were at the Porsche Leipzig Summit, obviously competing in that event. And then you heard the news that the next year of the iRacing World Championship competitions on the road was going to transition into this Porsche Tag Heuer Esports Super Cup. And you told me you were celebrating and doing a little fist bump in the background. And from what I understand, open wheel racing was never really your main passion or intrigue. You just did it because you wanted to compete against the best. And then you saw this opportunity to jump into the Porsche 911 Cup car and really compete in a car that you enjoyed a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if anyone actually caught me like walking around sort of fist pumping, but I was stoked once the news came out that that's the direction that we were going in. Yeah, open wheel racing. Whilst Apex traditionally has been sort of an open wheel team, we've put a lot of effort into the IndyCar and historically been very competitive in the iRacing Grand Prix World Championship Series. Sorry, iRacing World Championship Grand Prix Series. I'll get that right at some point in my life. But yeah, the team has historically been open wheel, not so much a GT team. But me personally, despite coming through and appearing to be an open wheel guy, my heart has always been in a tin top. Open wheel stuff, whilst it's fun and has its merits and definitely has a place, I'm happiest in a car that just doesn't have that much downforce. So that's what keeps me happy, I suppose. The lack of grip, I suppose. Like just being able to hustle a car through a corner rather than having the thing completely glued is more fun for me.
Well, I think it's interesting you say that because obviously we mentioned Kroenke and he was such a dominant driver in the McLaren and that downforce era of the World Championship Series. But since he's made the jump over into the Cup car, he's one of these drivers who's been struggling a lot more. And we see someone like Josh Rogers, who was definitely a good driver, but in that McLaren as well. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but he just elevated that game a lot more. And one thing that I think has been interesting is that you managed to keep the performance fairly strong in the open wheel competitions as well. Can you talk to us about, as you then made the jump over into Porsche, you talk about doing a lot of prep in the preseason, but obviously last year getting 6th place, you had a lot of strong top 5 results. What were some of the things that you were doing behind the scenes that you think really built up to that good performance? You talk about the qualifying maybe being struggling this year, but what were the other things that you were just having a little bit more success with last year?
I think last year I was practicing just a little bit more efficiently than this year. This year's sort of been tough with work this year compared to last year, and the work as well, building up the Apex Racing Academy. So I'm jumping around a lot of different things and sort of squeezing in practice sort of when I can. I'm still probably getting the same hours, but I'm maybe not quite in the best mindset when I do practice. Last year was different. I had a far freer schedule, and was able to practice probably in a better way and felt better with my practice and felt just that little bit better with the car. I think I'm still operating as well, or at a similar level as I was last year, but the competition that's come in from Pro Series last year plus an extra year in the car for everyone, the standard has just skyrocketed and will probably continue to skyrocket as well. So it's maybe not so much that I've taken a step back, it's just everyone else has taken a step up, and I haven't quite gone as high with my step up as everyone else. So it does make things a little bit difficult when everyone's pushing so hard and the entire field is so close. But hopefully next year I can move closer to the front of the field.
And you mentioned it earlier, the alliance that you guys have kind of formed with the MSI team, I do believe. You had the entire Apex team had a very strong run the first time out at Le Mans. Now, unfortunately, that result didn't get actually counted towards the series. But what have been some of the benefits that you guys have also seen from partnering with another team? Because obviously, it's very good having your teammates and your own set processes and your way of working with each other. But then you bring in people from another organization who might work slightly differently to you, might not necessarily even have the same mindset as you guys do. What's that process been like, and how helpful has it been just getting more bodies into your testing routine?
Yeah, it's more information that we're bringing in. Especially with Alejandro, who's come in, he's an incredible benchmark. We've seen this season how strong he's been, and even from probably midway through last season, like the level at which he's been driving at has been incredible. And having that as a benchmark every single week when you go to practice always will elevate your own game. He brings in different ideas as well in terms of the setup, in terms of practice routines, even everything. It's always good to sort of have a different perspective. We found ourselves after Donington, we didn't get everything out of it that we should have, and yeah, luckily Le Mans was a complete outlier of a track the first time around, so we were able to sort of rebound quite well. But bringing him into our mix was very useful for us because he brings in as you said, a different mindset, which enables everyone to sort of improve. Like we're able to bring a different mindset for him, so everything sort of mixed together quite well. We get on very, very well actually, and yeah, I think the results collectively, for him and for us as a team, have been quite strong since we started pairing up, which was just before Silverstone, and yeah, it's worked out quite well.
Well, one more question about World Championship Series in general is you're one of the few drivers who is an active streamer of the World Championship Series, and we talked about you being calm before. Even in the midst of that incident at the past race at Le Mans, you managed to stay very, very calm, much calmer than I have been. I remember I did an SCO race once, and I got very irritated by the LMP1 traffic, and I may have said some rude words on my stream, and one of those drivers may have found the clip and then sent that back to me a few days later. But how do you feel that streaming your World Championship races affects your mindset as you're actually competing as well? Are you aware of the fact that you've got, hundreds of people actually watching you as you compete as well? And do you maybe say or not say certain things that you wouldn't say? Because you're one of the few drivers who has your mic open on the stream as well, whereas people in the past who have streamed have always kept all that team communication, completely locked away.
Sure. It's something that I've kind of just learned over time. Streaming in general, there's times where you want to create clippable content and times where you don't, and the times where you've put the car in the wall or been put in the wall and reacting to it is maybe not one of those times. It probably doesn't look particularly good on you if you start then cursing and swearing and whatnot. But I have learned over the years that being able to keep a cool head for me works best. For other people it's different. Being able to just let out their anger in one go can reset them. I'm probably not comfortable with doing that. If I do that, I'll probably just sort of sit on that anger and linger on it. Like I don't fully get it out. So I end up just bottling it in a little bit, focus on what I still need to do, forget about it initially, and then afterwards, if I want to get angry, I'll get angry afterwards. But for me, I am sort of conscious a little bit that I'm streaming to an audience and that audience is watching and waiting for something interesting to happen. So I like to try and keep the focus of anything that I do stream on the driving and a little bit of the communication with the chat as well, rather than being known for the guy who puts it in a wall and goes crazy every 2 or 3 races sort of a thing.
Well, that's actually a good question for you. Do you actually have the chat up and on in front of you, I guess, while you're actually competing as well, or do you put that chat away during the races and then just interact in the breaks, between each of the races and then after as well?
Oh, for a World Championship event, it all disappears. It's all gone. I don't hear anybody. I don't see anything. I just focus purely on the driving. But like I find it, and again, this will be different for everyone. I don't mind looking at chat and interacting sort of in between races. It sort of helps maybe settle the nerves a little bit if I'm feeling a little bit edgy during the race or during the meeting. If I sort of mentally get myself into a position where it's similar to the like regular streaming stuff that I've done sort of over the winter, then that sort of puts me in a better mindset almost. It's trying to find the right balance between being like fully intense and in the moment and not overdoing it where you're like panicking and stressing and shaking and all of that. It is a constant sort of struggle almost to try and find the right balance between that, but as and when I see fit, I'll interact with chat and interact away and sort of keep myself on an even keel.
Well, you keep yourself on an even keel, but I think one of the reasons you focus on that, not just for your own benefit as well, but I mentioned it a bit earlier, you're one of the oldest drivers on the Apex Racing team. In fact, you're the oldest representative in the Porsche Esports Super Cup for Apex Racing. You have a lot of younger drivers who you get to work with, and I must assume that it gives you a lot of motivation, given that they must have a lot more free time to practice, and therefore, are continuously putting in a lot more effort in just being able to do that and accommodate their schedule. But you must also be a mentor in some ways. While they bring, maybe that raw enthusiasm and passion to the table, you probably just temper that down a little bit, especially when you're competing in a series as important as the Porsche Tag Heuer Esports Super Cup.
Yeah, that's possibly true. I think maybe over actually the last few months or so, the guys who, especially Johan and Kev, the maturity and the level at which they've reached at the minute, I don't need to do so much managing of things. They're plenty good to do that on their own. But at times, maybe before, I probably do bring sort of the calmer head to things. It's just in my nature. I'm not a particularly excitable or hyperactive guy. I've always been sort of a even keel sort of person. So being able to bring that to the team, I think, is beneficial. It brings a different approach to things, and I think if you take a little bit of everything, that sort of works, rather than having one set way of doing things across the entire team. Having a bit of variety, I think, is a good thing.
Well, speaking of variety, let's move on then out of World Championship competitions, because it's not just in those that you continue to compete. Continue to compete on some of the official iRacing series as well. The one that I noticed, you were the inaugural winner of the IMSA Michelin Pilot Challenge when the TCR class did come out. You were also the winner last year of the 2019 Petit Le Mans, but the one that stood out to me was you were second in last year's Bathurst 12 Hours in the 911 Cup class as a solo driver. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me a little bit about the amount of effort it took and the amount of preparation to be able to survive 12 hours at the mountain, especially in that slower class car with all those GT3 machines trying to make their way by you?
Yeah, that's almost a funny story how that entire thing came out. So I remember sitting at work and scrolling through the iRacing forum on my lunch break on the Thursday before the race. I think it was the Thursday, and I seen Nim had posted something on the iRacing forum saying, if you've got 2 accounts or whatever, you're free to race solo and you won't get DQ'd and you won't get, banned by doing it. And I thought, not doing anything else this weekend, and we weren't going to run a car. Yeah, sure, why not? So I did about a couple hours practice for the race, rocked up. I think the week before, the Pro Q guys, so I think it was Jared, was working on a set for Bathurst for Pro Q, and the 12 hours the week after. So I actually had a little bit of a base set to work off of. I ran for an hour or so on the Thursday night. Thought, I think I can do this. Got myself physically, mentally sort of prepared, and I guess food-wise prepared. So I got everything that I need in terms of snacks and stuff to get me through the race. And then I streamed it, and I completely locked into it. It was a ridiculous race where finishing was a minor miracle, especially given the fact that I didn't have a single incident with a GT3 car. The entire race, all 12 hours was completely plain sailing, aside from, I think it was one spin coming down the mountain. Yeah, I have no idea how I accomplished it. I will never do it again. And I don't encourage anyone ever to try it. It was a stupid idea, but I got second in the end, and I was very, very happy with it. And I was very tired after.
And
I was exhausted.
I'll ask the important question then. Did you take a break to go use the bathroom while you were switching across the 2 accounts?
Yes, I did. That was, I'm able to take some, the bathroom's very, very close to my bedroom here, so I was able actually to take a quick bathroom break in the pit stops where I was fueling taking on both fuel and tires. So I was able to at least get out of the seat and run around and at least keep the body moving, because it is a very long, 12 hours is a very long time just sitting and steering and pedaling essentially. So I was able pretty much every hour to get up and move, sort of once we got into the daytime and we weren't double stinting tires. And it actually became quite straightforward maybe after about hour 4 or 5. Once I switched over to the second account, I couldn't tell you a thing that happened until about hour 11. It was very, steady, just hit my marks and don't make any silly mistakes.
Well, it's impressive that you managed to get away without incurring the wraths of the GT3 machines. I remember the last few years have been interesting with that and the multi-class racing that does provide. But let's move back then to the Apex Racing Academy for just a second. And obviously that's restarted this past year and now got a partnership with VRS, and you're doing some of the data packs in the GT machines. It's come full circle, and where you started learning about sim racing, you're now passing that knowledge back down to a new generation of sim racers in many ways, who I'm assuming have also then seen you compete on the World Championship stage for the last few years. So what's that experience been like for you? Are you kind of noticing certain drivers who you're seeing a lot of potential from, and does that excite you that you're able to give back to the community in this way?
Yeah, it's always exciting to be able to do something like this. Being able to sort of give back in the way in which I've learned and how I came through. There's a lot that I think I can give as well in terms of being able to coach new people coming through and help them out in what they're looking for. So yeah, currently doing data packs for the Ferrari and the McLaren GT3 cars. The GT3 cars, I think at the minute are just a little bit less popular with the new Corvette that's come out and the L'Oreal P2. So a lot of attention and eyes are on that. But GT cars are always sort of like a staple of iRacing and have been for a very long time. So and I think there's a lot that can be learned from doing those cars and sitting in them every week. So yeah, it's been good fun getting back into it, and yeah, not much else really to say other than it's good to see the member base is growing, positive feedback with it, and I think we're heading in the right direction with it.
And I think the one thing that I've found very interesting is that you guys are, I feel like, giving a more complete kind of picture in a lot of ways. You have that partnership with VRS, so the telemetry is available for people to compare as well. But the other thing I've noticed is, whereas some of the other setup shops, if we're going to call them that, setup shop slash driving schools, they may give one or two setups, you guys seem to be giving a lot more options for drivers and options for them to figure out what's right. And then, like you say, that extra step of interaction where you guys are, helping out in Discord and being able to guide maybe on different changes and stuff. I asked this question to Sebastian Job a little while ago. How much of a difference do you think there is in terms of raw pace between the setups that you guys are able to give through the Apex Racing Academy versus something that you may have competed in, let's say, the VRS World Endurance Championship that happened a few years ago?
Sure. I think that's like the big question that a lot of people want to know is like, well, what's the difference between a pro setup and something for the academy? Really, for especially the GT cars, not much difference because there's only so much you can do with them, and at the end of the day, like, we're not competing in most of these cars at this time, so hiding stuff probably doesn't make too much sense. On top of that, I'd say the only thing that's really different is that we only put a certain amount of time into the setups just because a lot of us have to cover a lot of things. I mean, sure, you could spend 10-15 hours on the setup, but then you need to cover multiple data packs, and maybe you want to, or maybe you're competing in something else as well, so you're sort of time restricted as well. But for the time that we put in, we're always trying to put absolutely everything into the setup that we can. Like, we're not holding back anything. And then when it comes to interaction with the guys in Discord, if they don't like something with the set, or they want a different behavior from the car, we're more than happy to say, all right, we'll change a front roll bar or spring or toe adjustments or caster adjustments, stuff like that, so that they build up the skill set that they need to troubleshoot their own and help build their own setups. So the idea is that we're not there just to provide setups, we're there to make better sim racers across the board, whether that's just in their driving or their setup knowledge or their racecraft, whatever that might be. We're there to try and make people better.
Well, a few more questions then, Jamie. Obviously, we've talked about the prior few seasons in the World Championship Series, but you mentioned having a full-time job. You've now taken on some responsibilities with the Apex Racing Academy. What's your kind of vision for the future? We know you want to win World Championships. Everyone who is in the series has that ultimate goal of being the world champion and being the best, driver in iRacing. Do you have a passion to maybe quit your full-time career and then try and do this full-time like a lot of other people are doing? Or for someone like you, do you enjoy your full-time career and it enables you to then spend your time doing this side hobby and very much take this as an opportunity rather than a job and a career?
Very good question. So I think next year I'll be able to do this full-time. I think that's the plan. It's getting everything in place for that, so I guess watch the space on that one. Guys will be able to see a lot more of me, I think, fairly soon, on Twitch and streaming, just regular random races, I guess, over the winter. As for, is it something that I wanted to keep as as like a side hustle almost? That was the original plan, although I think at this point I'm realizing if I want to be successful at this level, I need to be able to put more time in, and I can't put more time in with my current schedule. It just is what it is. So changes in life have to be made, risks need to be taken. So if I felt I could continue the way that I was and ever put myself in a position to win a world championship, which is still the end goal for me, if I didn't think I could do it, I would stop. But I still think I have it in me, even though I haven't yet actually won a race. I still know that there's something there in me that says I can definitely still do this, and so I'll keep doing it until either I do it or I realize I won't be able to.
I think that's a good answer. And for everyone who, let's just plug your Twitch very quickly. Twitch.tv/Jamie Fluke, I do believe.
That's the one, yeah.
Nice and simple, I guess. Nice
and simple. No gimmicks. No funky business with XXIV or whatever, or anything like that thrown into like back in the old COD or Xbox gamer tag handles or anything like that. So, no, nice, simple, just my name. Nothing flashy about it. Once you see the name, hopefully that's like, oh yeah, I know exactly who that is.
And actually, before we move on to our final topic, a few questions from our YouTube chat. Now, your teammates are very keen to know, Jamie, do you know how to say pizza in Italian?
I do, but Kevin doesn't.
Well, Kevin and Peter, I hope that answers your question. And then a good question from Ryan. Hi, Ryan. Glad you're watching. Question for you, Jamie. Does sticking to one series help with consistency, or does doing a mixture help in regards to being able to adapt to different series and disciplines a lot more quickly?
Yeah, good question. I think if you just want to build up a general consistency across the board, then sure, chop and change, but I don't think you'll actually improve your overall driving level. If you want to actually fundamentally get better at going faster, then stick to one thing and push like crazy until you've reached the level that you want to achieve. Only then would you start to branch out into other things and try and apply that to different cars and the different techniques that different cars may require. So I'd say initially focus on one thing until you're like, okay, I know what I'm doing now. I'm at a good level before starting to branch out into other things.
Do you ever look at someone like Johan, who's able to jump across so many different things? He competes in 2 World Championship series. He does data packs for the Apex Racing Academy in a totally different car as well. Do you ever look at him and feel a little bit jealous that he's able to adapt so quickly? And is that just something that you build up as a skill set as well?
It is something that you build up as a skill set. I wouldn't say I'm actually jealous of Johan, because I think if I put my time into something like Rallycross, I could compete at that level. If I was able to compete at 2 in the morning, I probably would have tried to have gone for Coke Series at some point. I fully would back myself to, anything that I put my time and effort into, I could be successful at. So even on the oval side of things, I would say I'm confident that if I put the time in, I could, reach the top level. Yeah, so I think it's just that Johan's more visible at this point across multiple disciplines, more so than definitely having an edge on me, being versatile. I think I showed with the VCO competition, the Cup of Nations it was, that jumping between cars for me wasn't a huge concern.
I was just about to bring that up as well, and it's a perfect segue into our final topic of the day, which is just previewing very quickly the upcoming iRacing Petit Le Mans powered by VCO, and we're delighted to be able to confirm that all 10 hours of commentary is going to be brought to you by Radio Show Limited. Coverage obviously going to still be produced by us at Racebot TV, but Jamie, you won the race last year. You're not competing this year to defend your title. However, it's one of the most chaotic races across of all of sim racing. We talk about a very tight track where we're going to put more cars on the track than you do in real life. Often you'll see splits of upwards of 50 cars, and with a brand new Dallara P217, we're seeing time differences between that leading prototype class and the GTEs in a 6-second range. So for these prototype cars, if you get stuck behind a slower class car, for example, going through the S's, you can lose upwards of 2 or 3 seconds, and that often means that some of the more inexperienced drivers can take a few more risks.
Sure, absolutely. So it's a track that I hadn't actually done a lot of multi-class on before taking on the challenge last year. And the one thing that I sort of realized was, if I get stuck behind a GT3 going through the S's, if I'm in a prototype, then so will literally everyone else. It's going to happen. So being patient and taking calculated risks is the order of the day. And just not getting yourself into trouble. I see so many endurance races where guys have put it in the wall or got into contact with traffic within the first 2 hours of the race, and it's a long race. 10 hours is still a very long time. Give yourself a shot later on. You don't need to take too many risks at the start to still be right in the fight come the end. If you're quick enough as well, like if you've got raw pace in the car, you'll get through the traffic fine. Be patient with it, and you should come out with a good result.
Well, I don't want to bring up some more bad memories, but you talk about the start being so important. You dive too wide down that hill across the start-finish line for the first time, and as everyone plows into turn one, jockeying for position, thinking back to the BMW Sim Cup 120 just a few weeks ago, you and your teammate Antoine Hiegelin were sharing a car, and you also had the Apex team partnering with Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan. Both of your cars got caught up in incidents in turn number one. So it's a crazy race, and it's not just that inter-class, mingling that's going to be an issue. It's also how you're going to manage to compete with the drivers around you.
Yeah, absolutely. So that race definitely didn't go well for us, and it's a shame that it panned out the way that it did. But yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to knowing who you're around and what you can and can't do. So maybe there's some guys that now move on to sort of like the list of guys that you don't want to race too hard, and some guys will be on the list that you can go side by side across the entire lap. So for racing guys in your own class, regardless of what class it is, I think the fundamentals of the racecraft are the same across the 3 classes. Being aware of who you're around at all times is crucial to determine what you can and can't get away with, especially in a long race. Anything over 30 minutes is a race long enough where you can pick and choose your fights without having to stress too much. So I'd say the focus is to be on, certainly push and fight for your position if it's worth it, but realize as well sometimes that not every fight is worth fighting, I guess.
And, well, we talk about the Sim Cup 120 being a one-car event in many ways. Well, it's sort of sounding to me like right now it's going to be very similar across all 3 classes. I'm looking at the paints that we have submitted for the top split. You obviously have the one-mate class, which is the Dallara P217 LMP2 class, but predominantly what we're seeing is BMWs in the GTE class and Audis in the GT3 class. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there. I do believe for the viewers on the YouTube and Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, all of the video streams, you're going to get to watch a live lap on board with the Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan car as well. And here it goes, just as they dive down through that last corner. But Jamie, just a question for you. Road Atlanta is one of my favorite tracks on the service, and Petit Le Mans in many ways is one of my favorite endurance events, maybe only second behind the 24 Hours of Nürburgring. You won this last year. What's your thoughts compared to some of the other iRacing special events? It's a little bit shorter, a little bit more intense in many ways, but is it one of your favorites, or do you have another one that's a little bit funner for you?
Yeah, good question. The Road Atlanta is a track that I enjoy, but historically have not gone particularly well at. I got fortunate actually last year. I was paired with Kevin and Michele Constantini. They did sort of the hard work for me, and I came in at the end and just finished things off. I think the event's good. It is a unique test in that it's a narrow, almost a club size track. It's barely sort of like international sized, if that makes sense. It's very narrow, very confined, and a lot goes on over the course of the 10 hours. I enjoyed the event when I did it last year. I think it's the first time I actually tried it. I don't think I've raced it before. As for what would be my favourite, anything that goes beyond 12 hours, I'm actually not a huge fan of. So I've done the Daytona 24 a few times, I've done Le Mans a couple of times. I've actually not done the Nürburgring 24, so maybe I'll have to do that at some point. But races where it's almost mandatory to sleep in the middle of it, for me, just take too long. It takes up your whole weekend. And you're always just left exhausted by the end of it. So I feel like it's only worth it if you actually win or like finish well. Otherwise, it feels like an awful lot of effort for, disappointment probably. If the races can be confined to one day, then I'm usually happy enough.
Well, we just took a look on board with the Rahal Letterman Ladingen crew. It's a very tight track, very fun. But Jamie, thank you so much for joining us here today. Delighted to have you as a co-host with Connery Maddock off doing some other broadcasts right now. Once again, let's just plug your Twitch. You talk about being streaming more maybe in the future, but currently what's your schedule looking like for streaming?
Currently, it's I stream the PESC races, the Porsche Esports Super Cup races. That's all I can definitely commit to. After that, which we're only a week and a half away from that, so I probably stream maybe 2 or 3 times a week, maybe more. I don't know. We'll see how we feel. But for now, it's just those races. It's all I can commit to. I won't be streaming anything this weekend for Petit Le Mans because I'm not racing, and I think I'm out during the day on Saturday. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the streaming front. But yeah, after the World Championship events are done, I expect to see a lot more of me.
So twitch.tv/Jamie Fluke. Go give him a follow. Thank you so much for joining us. And well, that's going to be it here for another episode of Talking Tents. Before we go, let's just preview another great weekend of racing action coming up live on RaceSpot TV. This Friday, tune in for the final round of the IndyCar iRacing Series, as well as catching another round of Friday Night Primetime as we showcase the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship over the course of a 12-week season. Then on Saturday, make sure to catch the final iRacing special event of the year, the iRacing Petit Le Mans powered by VCO, with commentary provided by Radio Show Limited and coverage, as always, in association with us over here at RaceSpot TV. Then on Sunday, it's another busy day. The busy weekend of racing continues with 4 different events. It all kicks off with the brand new Ivor GT Sprint Series, followed by the Deutsche Sim Racing Championship live on Nürburgring TV, the continuing final stage of the European Sim Racing Masters, and it's all going to finish off with the ever-entertaining Porsche Sport Carrera Cup. As always, my name is Arjuna Kankipati, and for our producer Hugo Luis down in the production booth, we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.